Hi, so climate change. Whether you agree it's real or not, it is a big issue. Everybody's talking about it, everybody's worried about it, and everybody's putting procedures in place to do something about it. So it is one of the issues of our modern times, with politicians talking endlessly about it, with plans that are basically reduce, reduce, reduce. However, there is a plan B. The plan B is all to do with geoengineering. Geoengineering is that tinkering with our environment in order to undo the man-made changes that we have done by introducing another man-made change to undo them. Now, geoengineering actually isn't a new idea. There was a US military project called Project Argus in 1958 where they blew up some hydrogen bombs 300 miles above to disrupt telecommunications and ballistic missile strikes halfway around the world. And it was successful. And the Americans and Russians continued with those above ground tests until 1962. And of course, above ground nuclear tests were banned in 1963. Now, Van Allen, the discoverer of the Van Allen belts, was originally hugely in favour of this, but he changed his mind because these experiments actually created a new radiation belt around the Earth which disrupted the magnetosphere for a couple of decades, I think. But anyway, this is not a new idea. Suppose it's this that prompted NASA to release a report in 2011 which was a study of what would happen if there was only a small nuclear war. We're talking about somewhere in the region of 50 to 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs. What would happen if they were exploded? Because the model really is if we go for a superpower all-out nuclear war, we get terrible winter. So what about if we just have a tiny, tiny one? And 50 to 100 is the same number of weapons a country like India has in its nuclear arsenal. It represents 0.03% of the total worldwide nuclear arsenal. Anyway, it was estimated that it would throw up so much soot and dust into the atmosphere that we would get a cooling of 2.25 degrees centigrade, which would result in us not topping that 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, there were several criticisms to this. One, as you would expect, the idea that it would cut out the sun's rays may or may not be true, because what it might do is interfere with the ozone layer and in fact increase the ultraviolet radiation. And there's an expected 10% drop in our food production as well resulting on this. But that basic idea of exploding a nuclear weapon in order to affect climate change is an idea that people are having. Science is really at its best when it can do lots of little experiments, get the data and come to a conclusion. The problem with geoengineering, of course, is the smallest that you can do this is on the size of a planet, and we've only got one planet to practice on. So it is an area of great debate whether throwing up that much soot would in fact have any long-lasting effect apart from leaving an awful lot of burnt-out fields because of the increase in UV. And of course, the idea of doing that, just the idea, is quite shocking to people, of course, so there'd be a huge political backlash against doing that. So there is an enormous argument going on at the moment about whether it's valid or not. But there is another option that doesn't consist of throwing up soot, and I received an email about this from a chap who is involved in the project and asked not to be named, but he sent me an email about this proposed project. Have you ever heard of olivine? Olivine is a mineral, magnesium iron silicate, found all over the place but mined mostly in Norway, and the Scandinavians think of it as the ideal rock for saunas because it doesn't stress particularly well under heating and cooling, and so it lasts for absolutely ages. It's also used in aluminium foundry casting because it's great at making a sand that uses less water means less steam means better castings. So it's a really unusual material that has uses, and it has one property that's actually quite astounding. It's able to absorb carbon dioxide, and it's able to absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. So 1 litre of olivine will absorb all of the CO2 produced from 1 litre of burning petrol. So it has this astounding property. But the problem is it is quite slow in doing that. When it does that, incidentally, it also heats up. And that thermal property that's kept in a large mass can be used as an electricity generator. So it has some astounding qualities. The problem being you need it really in a powder form for it to do any really great sequestration of CO2. And I'm sure by now you can see where I'm going with this, because what we need is a powder distributed through the air across the whole world of olivine dust. And how are you going to do that? Well, the plan basically is to find yourself a handy mountain of olivine, dig a hole, drop a H-bomb in there and blow it to smithereens. Now, before the knee-jerk reaction sets in, have a think about this for a second or two. Mining using nuclear weapons is in fact not a new idea, because in mining, of course, the biggest costs are involved with drilling and exploding and then gathering and crushing all of that ore. And remember, since 1958, there have been something like 1958 to 1962. There have been something like 500 above-air explosions already, and something like 1,500 underground tests. In Bikini Atoll, during that period, there was an atomic test more or less once every day. So, what harm could a couple more do? If you applied that to olivine, then all that mining cost, the crushing up costs and the distribution costs are all taken care of rather handily by a single explosion. Suppose that one of the biggest concerns would be the radiation. Now, it is possible to mitigate against that in the design of the bomb. For example, boron, oxygen, water will all absorb neutrinos, neutrons and heavy elements and reduce that amount of contamination by a factor of 100 or so they reckon. In the plan I saw, this was suggested not as an ongoing thing, but as a single shot. Mostly because there aren't that many handy mountains of olivine about in unpopulated areas. So a couple of H-bomb explosions turn back global warming to the tune of 50 or 60 years. I want to read you a quote from James Fleming, the notable historian who was concerned about this. So he said, geoengineering is in fact untested and dangerous. We don't understand it, we can't test it on smaller than planetary scales, and we don't have the political capital, wisdom or will to govern it. Planet tinkering is not cheap, as some economists claim, since the side effects are unknown. Most poignantly by turning the blue sky milky white or the ocean soupy green, by attenuating sunlight and with starlight, and by putting bureaucrats and technocrats in charge of a global thermostat. Geoengineering will alter fundamental human relationships to nature, and for me, that's actually the biggest point. So the plan is there, and it's actually been thought about by people like NASA, government agencies, individual groups are all thinking about doing this. Now, I can't say that it's a bad idea. Actually, when you think about it, it's not. It seems quite reasonable, if one might put it that way. I have my own personal reservations from the Fleming quote that I spoke about, but that's just the way I see it, and it's how I think about it because of those things. What I'd be really fascinated in knowing is what you guys thought about it. Of course, we are quite active on the comments, and I do enjoy the comments as an addition to the video, because these videos really are talking points and things to think about, and if you're not thinking and talking, then that's probably not the best of ideas. So, by all means, post some comments, let me know what you think. I'd be absolutely fascinated to know, and maybe we could get a conversation going on this one. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please do remember to like and subscribe.